no longer mourns.
الشرق الأوسط המזרח התיכון העובר אני עונה אורתודוקס When we say the Holy Land, we're normally thinking of one particular part of the Middle East. But in a sense, the entire Middle East is Holy Land. It's never really known the separation of church and state, which we take for granted in the West. Religion is still a complete way of life. This is, after all, the birthplace of three great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The roots run deep. You're walking where the prophets walked, touching the stones that they may have touched. A great deal of what's going on in the Middle East today can be traced back to religion. Take Israel, for example. Why is Israel so important to the Jewish people? According to the Bible, it all started about 4,000 years ago with a shepherd named Abraham, the leader of a Semitic tribe who were later to be called the Hebrews. It is believed that Abraham lived in Babylonia, what is now modern Iraq. The Bible tells us that God spoke the following words to Abraham: "Get thee out of thy country, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great." So Abraham leads his family into a region that we now know as the Holy Land, corresponding roughly to modern Israel, but which was then called the land of Canaan. But because of a famine in Canaan, Abraham's descendants have to move on to Egypt. Many hundreds of years later, after their exodus from Egypt, and during their wanderings in the Sinai Desert, Moses receives the 10 Commandments from God, which lay down the basic laws that will govern the Hebrews. And it's said to be during this period that the Hebrews first started to refer to themselves as the Israelites, after Abraham's grandson Jacob, who had also been known as Israel. But it's not until 1020 BC that the Israelites finally become the dominant power in the land of Canaan and establish the kingdom of Israel. This is the golden age of the ancient Hebrews, the age of Saul, David, and Solomon. But the united kingdom of Israel only lasts for about 100 years before it breaks up into two smaller kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And it's from Judah that we get the name Judaism, for the religion of the Israelites. And this is also where the word Jew comes from. So the descendants of Abraham have gone by 3 different names. First the Hebrews, then the Israelites, and then the Jews. But the northern kingdom of Israel is subsequently conquered by the Assyrians. And then the southern kingdom of Judah falls to the Babylonians, who carry off many Jews into captivity. And from then on, the region will be occupied by a succession of foreign invaders, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Crusaders, Turks, and finally, in this century, the British. But it was the Romans in 70 AD who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, the most sacred Jewish religious center, and sold thousands of Jews into slavery. And no effort to rebuild a Jewish state in the Holy Land makes headway until the end of the 19th century, when the Zionist movement starts to bring a large number of Jews back to their promised land. This migration culminates in the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. But there is another people who also have a claim to this same Holy Land, the Palestinians. Where does the word Palestine come from? Let's go back in history again, to the time when the Israelites were struggling to conquer Canaan. A people from the Aegean, called the Philistines, settle on the coast, and later expand into other parts of the land. But the Israelites eventually drive the Philistines back into this small coastal area, which becomes known as Philistia. And when the Romans invade the Holy Land, naming it Judea, Jewish rebels cause them so much trouble that the Romans decide to remove all Jewish associations from Judea. So they take the old name, Philistia, translate it into Palestina, and apply it to the whole country. So this is where the word Palestine comes from. But does that mean that the modern Palestinians are actually Philistines? Only indirectly. The non-Jewish population of Palestine in Roman times was a mixture of Philistines, Canaanites, and many other peoples. In the 7th century AD, Palestine was conquered by the Arab Muslims, and its inhabitants gradually became Arabized. So Palestinians today are, above all, Arabs. And just like the Jews, they can trace their ancestry back through people who have lived in the Holy Land for thousands of years. Most of the Palestinians are Muslims, and Jerusalem itself has a special sanctity for the Muslims as well as for the Jews. In the very earliest days of Islam, prayers were directed towards Jerusalem, and it was only later that the Muslims had to face Mecca. And the very spot in Jerusalem that the Jews revere as a relic of their temple is only meters away from the Muslim shrine known as the Dome of the Rock, from which Muhammad is reputed to have made his night journey to heaven. The Dome of the Rock is, in fact, one of the earliest religious buildings in Islam. And Islam itself dates back to 622 AD, when most of the Middle East is divided up between the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, and the Persians. And the two main religions are Judaism and Christianity. The deserts of Arabia are outside the mainstream of Middle Eastern life. And there is continual conflict going on between the Arab tribes, the Bedouin, a fierce, proud, and very independent people. Bedouin left today. But 1,400 years ago, most of the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula were nomads, and all of them were tribesmen. They believed in many different gods, and there was a tremendous rivalry between tribes. And then Muhammad steps onto the scene. But he doesn't come from the desert. He comes from a trading town called Mecca, where he is a successful merchant who often comes in contact with Jews and Christians. When he receives a revelation that there is only one God and begins preaching this, the tribal elite of Mecca, who worship a number of different gods, become angry. And Muhammad and his followers emigrate to Medina, a farming oasis to the north of Mecca. The Muslims call this the Hijra, which means emigration in Arabic. And the date of the Hijra to Medina, 622 AD, is where the Muslim calendar begins. At Medina, Muhammad is invited to become the leader of the local tribes. He organizes his followers into a community, the community of submission to God, or Islam in Arabic. In order to govern this community, Muhammad has to enforce God's law, just as Moses enforced God's law for the Hebrews. And the laws of Islam are as explicit as those of the Jews, being based on the everyday details of Muhammad's life, as well as on the Quran. These laws have evolved into a complete set of rules for daily living, which still apply to all practicing Muslims today. How you will wash before praying. How you will eat and drink during the year. How in the 10th month, Ramadan in the Muslim calendar, you will not eat or drink at all between dawn and sunset. How you will give a certain portion of your income to the poor, and how you will dress yourself and cut your hair for the pilgrimage to Mecca, and exactly how you will behave while you are there. Islam is a total way of life, and it spread with remarkable speed, partly because of the zeal of the Muslims, and partly because of the weakness of the Byzantine and Persian empires at the time. Within about 100 years, almost the entire Middle East is part of a huge Islamic empire. Islam was both church and state from the very beginning. And although the Islamic Empire is no more, all the Middle Eastern countries today, with the exception of Israel, are still predominantly Muslim. And two of these countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, claim to be purely Islamic states and to make no distinction at all between religion and politics.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
But how has Islam managed to retain its vitality so successfully over the centuries? One of the main reasons is that many of the rules and regulations governing the everyday life of Muslims are contained in the Quran. And the Quran is more than just the holy book of Islam. It is to the Muslims what Christ is to the Christians. It's God's word. So the authority of the Quran is not to be questioned. It's a sacred guidebook for living and must be obeyed. And of course, God spoke to Muhammad in Arabic through the Archangel Gabriel. This makes Arabic almost a sacred language, and all Muslims, whether their native tongue be Persian or Turkish, or English for that matter, are encouraged to carry on their religion in Arabic. When you start learning Arabic, almost the very first phrases you have to master are religious ones. Alhamdulillah, God be praised. Insha'Allah, if God wills. Nothing will happen if God does not will it. The first words that a newborn Muslim baby hears are La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And these are the last words that he will hope to hear when he dies. So pious Muslims live and breathe and eat and sleep and above all talk religion. And because of its religious connotations, we should never underestimate the power of the Arabic language to sway people. Whenever an Arab leader gives a speech, there are inevitable echoes of the Holy Quran.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Wassalamu lana jami'an بإذن الله. السلام لنا جميعا على الأرض العربية وفي إسرائيل.
By now, it should be fairly obvious why both Islam and Judaism are still of great political importance in the Middle East today. But what about the third religion that was born here, Christianity? It also enters into present-day politics a great deal. There are a dozen or so different churches of the eastern branch of Christianity in the Middle East. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Church, the Nestorians, the Jacobites, the Maronites, the Copts. But it's the last two, the Maronites and the Copts, that we hear most about nowadays. To see how these churches evolved, let's trace the origins of Christianity itself. While Jesus grows up as a Jew, immersed in the Jewish religious life, his followers accept him as the Son of God, and a new religion springs up around him. This religion spreads from Jerusalem to Antioch in about 40 AD, where the words Christian and Christianity are used for the very first time. Antioch is now in modern Turkey, but this region used to be part of Syria. And so the church that grew up in Antioch is known as the Syrian Church. And it's from this Syrian church that in about 400 AD, a certain Saint Maroon comes to found the Maronite Church in the mountains of Lebanon. And today, there are about 1 million Maronite Christians in Lebanon, still carrying on their religion very much as in the time of Saint Maroon. In fact, the Maronites are the largest group of Christians in Lebanon, where the Christians as a whole make up nearly 40% of the population and wield considerable political power. But the largest Christian church in the Middle East is that of the Copts, which goes back almost as far as the Syrian church. Because after Antioch, the second place where early Christianity established itself was in Egypt, in Alexandria, in 45 AD. The word Egypt comes from the Greek Aegyptos, which also gives us an Arabic word, Qibt, which becomes Copt in English. So the Egyptian church, which arose in Alexandria, is also known as the Coptic Church. And because of their ancient pre-Islamic roots, the Copts still consider themselves to be the most Egyptian of the Egyptians. There are now about 4 million Copts in Egypt, about 10% of the population. And they're a significant political force, because for them, just as for most Middle Eastern Christians, religion and politics are often one and the same thing. But how has Middle Eastern Christianity been able to sustain its wholeness and power over people right up into modern times? Part of the reason is that it was sealed off from later developments in the Christian church. In 313 AD, the Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, and it is adopted as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And from then on, the general trend over the centuries is for Christianity to become a European religion. And the isolated pockets of Christianity in the Middle East are left behind. This isolation is reinforced by the coming of Islam. So Middle Eastern Christianity was frozen in time to a large extent. And that's why it has tended to change very little over the centuries. But Islam not only sealed off Christianity, it also protected it, just as it protected Judaism. This is because Islam has by and large been a remarkably tolerant religion. If we look back at the heyday of Islamic civilization, we find that the Christians and Jews fared exceptionally well. One of the reasons for this tolerance on the part of the Muslims is that they've always recognized the close ties between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. They refer to Christians and Jews as Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book of course being the Bible. They don't feel threatened by these two other religions because they believe that Islam is the final and complete version of God's message to man. So Islam is a very self-confident religion, which has few of the doubts and fears that have often plagued Western Christianity and made it intolerant of other religions. A striking example of this is what happened to the Jews in Spain at the end of the 15th century. While Spain was under Muslim rule, the Jews flourished. But when the Christian monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella reconquer Spain, they make use of the Spanish Inquisition to force upon the Jews a choice between conversion to Christianity or expulsion from the country. It's ironic that it's on the very day that the last Jew is expelled from Spain, August 2nd, 1492, that Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World, which is later to become a haven for so many millions of Jews. Our world sometimes seems to be tearing itself apart with conflict between North and South, East and West, rich and poor. Many of these conflicts would appear to come to a head